I'm Scott Walker and this is Walks on the Wild Side. In this video we're going to talk about why it's so important to revisit your old photos. But before we get into that, I just want to say in the current circumstances I hope you're all doing really well. For me, on my part, things are going fine. I just wish I could find a decent video on how to trim your own beard. So if anyone knows one, please write it in the comments below. I guess you could kind of say Walks' beard is a little on the wild side at the moment. But if that's my biggest problem, I've really not got too much to worry about. So on to the topic at hand, revisiting your old photos and why it's so important. Now, the other day I was thinking about the things I might miss if the current circumstances persist. And probably the next big thing in the British wildlife calendar is the return of the seabirds to our coastlines. And it's probably started now, but it'll happen in huge numbers over the coming weeks. We get puffins, guillemots, razorbills, all sorts of things, gannets. They all return to our coastline in large numbers, and they will nest, mate before they head out to sea. Now, I was looking back and reminiscing about the photos I took last year, and I spent a few days up at Bempton Cliffs in Yorkshire. And as well as looking at the photos that I processed and the ones that I eventually used, such as this lovely portrait of a puffin, it's just peeking its head out amongst the rocks that it's nestled within. And if you want to see more of those photos, you can head over to my website where you can see a few of them. But as well as looking at those photos, I also went back and looked at my unused raw files. And so what we're going to cover today is why it's so important that we should be doing that on a fairly regular basis. Now, the first reason that we should do this is because you'll find some hidden gems that you either missed or discarded the first time around. Now, when we wildlife photographers take hundreds of photos on a trip, we often very quickly go and rate them. So we'll decide which ones that we want to process and then eventually use. And that's often done fairly soon after taking them, either the same day or within a few days. It's very rare that we leave them much longer than that. And so it's important to go back and look at them because the choices that you made may not be the same as the choices that you make now. Now, I'm going to give you an example of one that I found what I think is a hidden gem. So I was lying across the cliff tops, there's a grassy cliff top, and I was waiting for a puffin to come in and land in front of me so that I could get it as it landed. And I saw two puffins coming towards me, heading to approximately my location. So I'd got one coming in on the right and one coming in on the left. Now, as these puffins approached, they realised they were going to land in approximately the same place. And the puffin on the left saw it and headed back round further along the cliffs to the left. And the puffin on the right circled back out to sea and landed further to my right. Now, I was left in a position of going, which puffin do I photograph? But in the moment and snapping off a burst of photos, I actually captured two puffins doing that circular motion and heading in opposite directions in the end. Now, I discarded this photo because it wasn't the photo I wanted. When I saw the puffins heading towards me, I thought I was going to get two puffins landing on the cliff. And when I got two puffins in flight instead, I was a bit disappointed with that. But with hindsight now, it's nearly a year later, I look at that photo and go, that was pretty good. And so I've processed it, and here's the results. Now, the second reason is about your development as a photographer. Now, we should all be improving all the time. We should always be looking to develop and become a bit better at the things that we do. And it's great to look back at old photos and say, am I better now than I was then? Has my photography improved? Have I learnt new skills? Have I learnt new techniques? Is my hit rate that I get successful photos improving from the past and I discard fewer photos? And if that's not the case, then you can look at why it is and what you need to improve to change and continually develop as a photographer. And here's an example. There's a portrait that I've taken of a razorbill, and it's all right, I quite like it. And the purpose was to get a nice blurred out background behind the razor bill, but to frame it with those purple pinkish flowers that are around the cliff face. Now, I would have liked those flowers to be a bit less blurred, but to still have the background as blurred. Now, you can change things to do with your aperture to make that happen. Now, just to explain that, if I wanted to decrease the blurriness at the foreground, I could have narrowed my aperture, moved to a higher f-stop. But that would have decreased the blurriness of the background. And so what I'd need to do to compensate for it and still get a blurry background is move closer to the subject. But I couldn't do that because I was already right at the edge of a cliff face. I couldn't move left, right, or forward, or I'd have fallen into the sea. And so what I would do now is take two different shots at two different apertures, and the final result would be blended together. So there'd be one aperture for the background and one aperture for the foreground. And that's to do with my development as a photographer. The third reason that you should be reviewing old photos is that you'll now find other uses for them. So photos that you discarded in the past because they didn't suit your purpose at the time, you may now have a use for. So for example, I put lots of photos in my YouTube videos. Typically there's between 5 and 15 a week, depending on what the topic is. Now, they can't all be my best photos. Some of them have to be slightly less good than others by the nature of them. And so now I would probably choose to process slightly more so that I've got other photos available to put in my YouTube videos. You may have other uses for them. Maybe you're on Instagram now and you weren't a year ago. Or maybe you're pushing more things out through your Facebook page than you were a year ago. Or maybe you're on TikTok now and you weren't a year ago. So you'll find other uses for those photos. Now here's an example. So here's a picture of a little family of gannets. So I saw two of the gannets, the ones in the centre here, touching beaks, and quite a few birds touch beaks, particularly during the mating season, and they do it to increase the bonds that exist between the pair. But I was quite attracted by the shape of it, and I had to decide in the moment whether to take that photo or not. I couldn't change position because they were on a lower stack of rocks than I was on, but I don't particularly like the fact that I'm looking down at them. Particularly the lower birds, you can see that I'm much higher than them. And as you know, I like to be level with the birds. So this isn't a photo that I chose to process at the time, but I have processed it now, and it might be a photo that I put on my social media page, but it's become a photo that I've used to demonstrate a point in this video. So there's another purpose for it. Now, when I originally rated these photos, there's something that I missed. Down in the corner, there's a little baby gannet and its mum's just sat on it, keeping it warm. Now, I didn't even notice this at the time I took the photo. Now, when I took the photo, it was very early in the morning, just minutes after sunrise had started. And so there was really low light still, but the light that existed was this brilliant bright yellow light. So balancing all the elements was quite tricky. And had I noticed this little baby gannet, I may have chosen to do something different because it hasn't really exposed the fact that it's there very well at all. But again, here I've found a purpose for this photo, and that's to demonstrate that even though it might not be a 10 out of 10, you can still find a use for it. And the final point, the final reason why you should be reviewing your old photos, is quite a fun one really, and that is to improve your Photoshop skills. Now, you'll find, as I have, that there's quite a lot of average photos that you perhaps don't want to do something with. So here's an example of a simple picture of a puffin on a rock looking down at the sea. Now, I got quite a few of these, nothing special about it, it's just an average kind of photo. So I decided to take one of these photos and process it in a variety of ways to help develop my Photoshop skills. When I process photos, I'm always aiming to make them as natural as possible. I don't want to make crazy photos that are composites of things that could have never existed, or change the colours in such a way that the wildlife doesn't look like it would have done to my eye. So it's really important to say that I don't normally do this, but you should do it to help develop your Photoshop skills. It's a little bit like those Brazilian footballers spend lots and lots of time practicing all their tricks and flips and things, and they don't do an awful lot of that in the game, but the fact that they've practiced it improves their skill at it. And likewise with this, if you choose a variety of quite outlandish ways to process your photos, you will develop your Photoshop skills, even though you may never choose to process a photo in that way again. So this fairly average photo of a puffin, firstly, I have chosen to process it as a nighttime picture. And here what I've done is really darkened it down in a variety of ways. So I've done quite a bit of burning on the rocks to darken them down. I've added a couple of different vignettes to take away some of the light from the corners. I've changed the blues in the sea to be a much darker shade of blue, whilst at the same time emphasising the light colours in the sea to make it look like it's the moonlight reflecting off them. And my aim was to create a photo where it looked like the moonlight was illuminating part of the sea and the rocks and the puffin. Now, there may be other people who are much more adept at creating these outlandish kind of photos than I am, but the fact that I've taken the time to practice doing something means that I'm going to develop some skills that I didn't have before, even if I never used them in a capacity where I'm going to produce prints to put out that look like this. Now, the second example I want to give you, I have chosen to process the photo like a toy camera or a lomography type camera. And all I've done here is softened the picture a little bit. So I've taken away some of the sharpness because that's the effect that these kind of cameras have. And I've added a gradient moving from blue to red across the photo. And, you know, it's quite a nice photo. It's not one I would ever use, but again, it's developed my skills and forced me to think about if I wanted to create that kind of photo, what would I do? And the third example is that I've chosen to process the photo as though we were in a really deep golden hour. So in this picture, the sea looks really golden as though it's reflecting that setting sun. I've darkened down the rocks quite a lot, burned them, and added an offset vignette. I've added a lens flare to replicate the kind of thing that might happen if you were shooting more directly into the sun. And I quite like this as a photo, but again, I'm never going to use it, but it's helped me think about the kind of things that I might do to create this photo. And that in turn develops my general Photoshop skills. So there you have it, 4 reasons why you should revisit your old photos today. And let's face it, what better time is there to do this? Many of us have more time on our hands at the moment than we normally would, so it's a great opportunity for you to do this exercise. I hope you got some value from the video, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up because that really helps the channel. I also appreciate anyone who wants to subscribe, and if you choose to do so, please don't forget to click the little bell button because that will send you a notification telling you that there's a new video to watch. If you have any questions or comments, I love to receive them and I always reply. So thanks very much for watching and I'll see you on the next video.